Did you know some of the best tools for gel printing are growing right outside? Grab some leaves, your gel plate, and let's jump in. In this video, I'll show you how to use real plants to create beautiful organic textures, and you might just be surprised by the stunning details that show up. It's easy, beginner-friendly, and a little bit magical. So I'm standing in my garden right now, and I'm surrounded by a lot of different textures and leaves to choose from. If you don't have a garden of your own, go for a walk in a park or a green space. You'll probably find a lot of textures from leaves and plants that you can use. So before we get too far into gel plate printing, let's first talk about some of our grasses and leaves we're going to be using today. This is blue fescue grass. These are seed heads that have now fully run their course, and I just pulled them off of the plant. But it's nice to not only have the seed heads, but also have tiny little bits of grass. That's a really nice option for using with your gel plate. You may also want to find things like the Lemony lace elderberry. This is one example that has very fine leaves. These ones work really well on the gel plate just because of the fineness of all the textures. It's going to create a really unique look, especially for those silhouetted pieces. And when you're choosing things like leaves, you want to look at the leaf shape and the leaf size. These ones have really nice veins. This is a Ninebark, and it is beautiful, has great color, nice veins, especially look at the back there. That looks gorgeous. And these are a nice size for my gel plate. Just to show you here, this is an 8x10 gel plate. That size is going to work really, really nicely. Same with my Nanking cherry here. These leaves have a really nice look, and they're going to work in a nice scale on the 8x10 gel plate. What you may want to avoid are larger leaves like the Ligularia. The Ligularia is beautiful, but you'd pretty much only be able to fit one leaf, maybe two, and you'd have a lot of dead space with it. So unless you're going to be doing a two-step print, like I'm going to be showing you a little bit later, this is not going to be your best choice, but it can work depending on what you're trying to create. There are also really nice textures, like the nasturtiums have beautiful textures. This is a bit of cosmos. That's another great choice for being able to have something very leafy and very fine to use on the gel plate. So let's start with a very basic print. I'm going to be using the Lemony lace elderberry. I'm going to work, I think, you know what, we're going to work in a little bit more of strips today. I tend to mix my colors a lot. Let's do this a little bit differently today. And again, looking at dime-sized or smaller amounts of paint. Not a ton of paint that we're going to be using in here. That might be too much, but again, this is where you always have a sheet you can burr off on, and that can make a big difference too. So again, we want to make sure that we get our brayer covered, and then we start moving it. And let's try this again. So this is the thing. I could have used a smaller brayer and then had a lot more specific spots with all of these colors, but you know what? This is going to work for now. It's not the perfect brayer pattern. I'm okay with going a little bit more loose on this particular pattern. All we're looking for here is a really nice fine coat of paint, and that's going to help us get the results we're looking for. And for this first print, I'm going to be using that Lemony lace elderberry. So yeah, the thing keeps growing like a weed, ends up on my path. And so you can decide if you want the full leaf. I'm just going to lay that as flat as I can. And you can decide which side of the leaf you want. Do you want the side like this, or do you want this side, which has a little bit more of the vein? I'm going to be showing you both ways so you can see how that works on our page. We have a group of 3 there. That should work pretty well. And we're going to just keep our other textures pretty simple today. I'm just going to be using some bubble wrap. I thought it'd be nice to leave an area that had a little bit more open space, because that will work really well for an art journal page or for a lot of different things. So we're just using a piece of copy paper for our very first print here. So can we press it down? And now with these ones, what we need to do when we are working with fresh leaves, the one key with this is making sure we rub really, really well, because what happens is, you can see even here, the vein in my leaf is going to want to stick up. So if we don't put our fingers right next to it and get all those little details, we're going to have big open gaps in any place where you didn't press down hard enough, where we want to try to get as much details amongst the paint as we can. So yeah, we want to make sure that we do get the details of the leaves in, but we want to make sure that we end up with a really great design. Okay, so let's pull that. And sometimes your leaf may come up with it. And look at that. Okay, so we have our first print. Because of the way I place those, you can see most of the definition on those leaves. But that being said, you'll notice that we don't have a lot of that really fine detail that maybe is what you're looking for. So we're going to set these aside and we're going to let this dry. And so if you haven't ever worked with layers or whatever, make sure you check out my other gel plate video where I share with you how you can create layers. This will make a lot more sense. So I've let this dry a little bit, but we're going to come in with a little bit of my Liquitex Basics paint here. This is a good white paint, so I'm using mostly Amsterdam and Liquitex Basics today. These are great paints to use. There's also other great paints out there. I just tend to use something that's a little bit more heavy body, a little bit thicker. I find I get better results with the gel plate when I use slightly thicker paints, like the Amsterdam paints. And so if we go across the layer of white, that's going to look great, but I'm actually going to add in a second color as well. That's just going to give us a really interesting look to this. And because I'm going on fairly thin, you're able to see where the leaves fall, and that is kind of important for this next step that I'm going to add in a second layer of color. So again, you can see generally where those are. If I add in just a touch of Prussian blue here, okay, and we're going to add it in here, and as we mix it, it's going to, you know, give us a little bit of a different look. I don't want it to overtake some of those blue areas, so I am going to try that. We'll see how that works, because again, we're building that print from the bottom up. So this, a lot of this is going to fall to the background. So this could end up being a really good print. This is a little bit of an experiment for me. If you wanted it really nice just off the bat, just stick with the white. But in this case, we're going to be playing a little bit more. I want a little bit more experimentation this time around. Just, you know, gives us a chance to try something a little bit different. So again, I'm using copy paper with this, and I'm just going to let this sit for a few minutes. Don't be in a huge rush. Clean off your brayer. Get ready for your next print. You want to make sure that you let those paint layers dry together on the surface, and that's going to give you the best results. Okay, so we've given this a few minutes to dry, so let's give it a pull. Oh, and it's pulling beautifully because you're getting that nice clean plate. Okay, I like this. I know this is a little less contrasty. I probably could have just gone with the straight Prussian blue, or I'd gone with the straight white. By mixing them, I started getting more of these pastel and softer look to it, but it's not bad. I personally love it. I like how this looks. Just add something that's a little bit different to the print, but this is really up to you. And you can see even just around these areas here, there's a little bit of like that clouding and that ghosting. So anywhere that first print didn't pick up, we're ending up in the second print, which is great, but it's something to be aware of. If you want to have these perfect things, you need to either remove that extra paint or just make sure you rub down really evenly on that first print to make sure you pull up as much of the paint as possible. So far I've stuck with more like blues, so let's go with reds. Let's go red and yellow, and maybe a little bit of gold. Those colors work beautifully together. So if you like the bolder colors, for some reason I don't gravitate towards red and yellow in my gel printing, but you know what? We're going to try a little bit more today, see how we do. And I'm just going to do like one spot of yellow. And you might think I put my paint on a little thick, maybe. I'm finding that it isn't too bad. Again, the thinner the layers, the better, but I find that as I'm talking, as I'm working, I often have to put in a little bit more paint as I'm filming, just because my studio lights are hot, and if I want to be able to give you an explanation, it means that I gotta let that paint sit for a minute, which means that sometimes, you know, it will dry out a little bit. So I would say this is as thick of paint as you'd really want. You may even want to go thinner. And again, if it's too much, you can always take, again, a piece of paper and roll off and then grab a bit more. So again, that was on a little bit thick, so let's just thin that out a little bit by just removing a little bit of the paint. And that's turned mostly red because, again, that red is quite strong, but I'm okay with that. So let's talk about other leaves. So we have the Ninebark. I love the Ninebark, but what's really nice about this is the veins in the back. So I'm going to actually go a few this way and a few the other way. So with this one, we're going to need to press these out a little bit because they're wanting to curl. That's why I often will put the leaves down in this direction because it's going to move more naturally. I'm not going to have to fight them quite as much. And so this is just a great way of just adding a little bit of texture. And then this is also where we don't have to stick with just one leaf type. We can bring in some Nanking cherry leaves. And the Nanking cherry is one of my favorite little bushes. Reminds me of my childhood when I used to go out and just strip the thing of all of its little cherries. And yeah, they're a great early bush that I love using in my garden. So then this is where we can make a decision. Like, do we do little groupings of these leaves? So we have maybe these big guys, but then have some of these guys be coming up in between them. And we can create a little design as we go along. So don't always have to put things randomly. I often do for these videos, but you know, doesn't mean you have to. And I think I'm just going to put my last one here in the corner here. All right, so just as I've been talking, I may have dried this out a little bit. So if you don't love the just straight white background, you can always take a sheet like this, like my sheet I was using with my brayer, and press that down. So that can work just as well. So if you don't like just all the white areas, and especially when you're working with larger leaves like this, or maybe you just end up having a little less interest going on in those middle sections, this is where using another gel print or just having another piece you've been cleaning your brayer on can work really, really well. So with these ones, we're going to have a little less of the issue with all those little edges. In this case, let's just, you know, I always massage it a lot just to make sure all those edges are down. We don't want to rush this. If you find your hand slipping, like if your paper is moving, that means you have too much paint on your surface. That's always a hard one when you start, and I had the same issue when I started. Even some of my first gel plate videos that I did on this channel, I did use too much paint. But you know what? That's how we learn. It's the only way we get better. So, not the perfect print, because again, I was using this an old sheet, but that does add interest. So you can see that doing this, but using your actual proper gel print that you spent a lot of time on, you can end up with some really interesting textures that basically this can work like a mask. So keep that in mind, and then even just your color choices by adding on the red on top of the blue, you can see the red's gotten a little bit muddier, but again, if you want more of those vintage looks, that's one way you can get it. And we want to pull these off. Now look at that, we are getting some very fun textures. I'm very happy with that. Look how beautiful those look. We're getting these perfect little leaf transitions. So this paint is drying beautifully on our gel plate. So I'm going to be adding in, this is basically a very light Naples yellow. Naples yellow is a little bit more of like almost like a creamy yellow color. And again, we don't have to put it on as thick as I have in the other layers because I'm finding that the room is a little less hot today. So again, we can go a little bit lighter. We want to layer paint, but you can see a lot of that imagery underneath it. And that is enough paint. Sometimes the hardest thing about gel plate printing is getting the right amount of paint on your gel plate. This can always be a little bit of a struggle. And one thing that's also sometimes a struggle is how to get the right amount of color down and getting the right color. So why did I choose more of a Naples yellow? Because everything here was already fairly warm colored, so by adding the light Naples yellow on top of yellow and red, it's going to work really well with it. A white would have given me a little bit more contrast. If I put something really dark, this would have muddied these colors, and because the paints I was using were a little bit more transparent, they probably would have actually disappeared into the background color. So I want to leave that and let it dry for another minute. All right, so let's pull this and see what we got. So always the longer you leave these things, the better they look. It's just how it goes. So the neat thing is we have a little bit more of an edge that has a little bit of teal and other colors from my previous prints, but look at that. You end up with a little bit of texture of some of the paint that didn't pull from the first one, and it just ends up giving you such great detail. Like, look at the detail of those prints. It's, oh, so beautiful. I could have made the background a little bit more interesting. I could have added another layer and done some other textures, but I wanted to keep it really simple today just to show you what a basic leaf print can look like and how to execute one well. So what if you're trying to get a really good effect And you want that silhouette and that detail. Well, let's play around with that a little bit in this next print. So I'm gonna keep the colors pretty simple here. I'm very much on the green blue kick lately. I think it's just summer for me. I'm just, you know, give me all the greens and the blues. We'll leave warmer colors to the fall, you know. So I'm going to take this guy. I've already used another print and I'm putting this down. So this is what we do if we end up having a piece like this that is really, really big, because we have a large piece. If I just took like my regular prints like I've done before, this would end up being like a really big blob and then a really interesting print, but still something with a really big blob. But what can we do to maybe bring this together? And so one thing that is going to be a little bit challenging with this one is this particularly thick stem is going to maybe give us a tiny bit of issues as we go on, but that's okay. Let's bubble wrap this thing, add in some texture around it, because why not? Why not? Why not just add in like a little bit more to this? Okay, so we take our copy paper. You press down, you want to get around that stem. You want to press down and try to get all those lines like we've done with every other one. We want to try to get as much texture pressed into that plate as possible. Okay, you want to get around that stem. Everything's looking good. Okay, so I want to hold my hand down here. We're going to pull this back. You'll see that I only have that basic shape, but we're going to pull this. And because this is sticky enough already, it's still staying in place. So we'll put that back down again and we're gonna rub it and let it dry completely. Okay, so let's pull. Let's see what we got. So there we go. So if you want one that has all of those details plus a colored background and you don't mind everything being very similar, this is a great way you can create a really textured print. So that means those really large leaves that would have such a large area that might not look really great on a project, well, you don't have to worry too much about it. The only thing with this one is that stem being so thick, it ended up having some movement in there, and I'm okay with that. It's kind of cool. It's kind of fun, but it's just so thick that, you know, when you're looking like an 1/8 of an inch thick or so, it just, you know, it's just going to affect how it prints on your page. So let's talk about grasses now. I'm using Prussian blue again, one of my favorite colors. If you haven't seen me use it in a bunch of projects, go back and take a look. Yes, I tend to use this one a lot. It is a great color. I just love how it works on my gel plate, and I just love how it combines with other colors. When you add it to a lot of pinks, it looks great. You add it to teals, it looks great. You add it to so many different things, you always end up with a really nice color. Let's talk about these. So what we can do is, again, we can make this look. I have to trim these a bit. They're a bit long. They're so long. My pieces here are about, I don't know, several feet. They're so long that they're actually going to not sit nicely on my gel plate. So we add that. Need to trim these guys as well too. And the first time I did this earlier this summer, these weren't quite as dry as they are now. They're basically done for the season. So, you know, you can even add in a slightly crooked one if you wanted. And I'm just going to be adding those on there. And so that looks pretty cool. You can try to do uneven groups. So let's, you know, add one there. This is also where I like adding the other grasses in place, because I like how it looks. Instead of it being completely like, oh, you've been placing these things. The nature of the blue fescues is they look wild in my garden, but I love them just because of, yeah, they have all these really neat textures. And we're going to cross that one as well too. And so for this first print, I'm actually going to use something different. I'm going to be using tissue paper, hoping I can get this to stay in place. I went fairly thin with my layer of paint, and it tends to dry quickly, so we'll see how this works. So again, my pieces moved slightly, but you can see this is a great way of being able to see where you're getting those edges, because you can see where the paint is picking up. So again, if there's little spots in here, you need to make sure that you come in there with your fingers and press that down to make sure you get that paint transfer that you're looking for. And so tissue paper is a great way to be able to see what you're doing, at least for that first layer. Let's pull this up. This might not stay as well. This was a little dry. but it should have worked okay. Okay, so that print, just wow. I love grasses. Grasses do such interesting things. And you can see they're always going to be thicker than the grasses that you put down. You're not going to get all those layers. It's almost impossible to get all of that little bits of detail without doing it this way. So now we lift that up. And that is so dry already that I can basically add my paint right away. In this case, I'm going to go straight in with my white paint. And this one I'm going to be doing on cardstock because this one I may choose to frame. Because I absolutely love how this print is looking. So some of these prints, you may just look at them and go, yeah, that's exactly where I wanted to go with this. This looks great to me. I'm getting a little bit of blue in there. I'm cleaning my brayer, but it's still giving me a little bit of blue. That was too much paint, but that's okay. We'll work with it. So that's a bit more paint. This is just going to mean it's going to take a little bit longer to dry when we add our layers on. I'm going to take a piece of Hammermill cardstock. Hammermill cardstock is one of my favorite cardstocks. It's very smooth. It has almost that bristle feel. And it's great for this. So I'm just basically going to leave this. Going to give it a good rub. I'm going to leave it for probably a good 5 minutes before I go pull this print. Okay, so let's check this print. Okay, I think we're good to go. It's coming off clean. So you can see where the paint was on really thick, it still wasn't fully dry. And that did affect my print here. So, lessons learned for next time. I should have let that dry a little bit longer. And I probably should have actually just put it back down once I saw that started lifting. But, oh well, you know, this is the nature of jelly printing. Sometimes we get it perfectly, sometimes we need to try it again. So let's flip this and just do one more. I love that Prussian blue. What I like about it is it has more warmth than black does. But it still has that contrast. So we're just going to go the other way with these because, again, the composition, it comes down to what do you want to do? Where do you want to go with this? We don't have to do it the same way every single time. So I put those a little high, but that's okay. You know, sometimes the heads are really high above, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're crossing. You know, we have options here. We don't have to always do everything the same way. It's a little tough when they're not wanting to stay down. I keep hitting them as I add them down. Sometimes you just have to put them down knowing that we're gonna, you know, add in another layer on top and that's gonna be just as good. Okay, so another piece of paper. Again, I'm gonna go back to that tissue paper. I'm loving how that tissue paper is working for being able to get a really good print for the second print. So tissue paper here is a little bit crinkly. I haven't spent any time flattening it out or doing anything with it. And so again, this is great for being able to try to pick up all that paint within all those edges. I think I had a little bit more paint on. It's a little less dry this time, which is great because that means I'm going to be able to get a little bit more detail. Yeah, so I'm getting more detail in those leaves than I did with the last one. And yeah, I'm a little bit addicted with this whole grasses thing. I've been finding that I love how they look. I love how they work. And again, there's just something very organic about it. Maybe it's just living in Alberta. We have a lot of prairie area where, you know, you'll walk through fields and you will find things like this. So, you know, and so again, with these areas here, sometimes you just want to rub them a little bit. Make sure you get that down really, really good. And look at that. So I'm going to be leaving this for probably about 10 minutes before I pull it. I want this to be super dry. The reason I'm going to do it this way instead of the way I did it last time is you can do it that way. It works really well. It's going to leave a little bit more paint on the plate. This way the plate should come pretty much perfectly clean and then we'll see what we got. Okay, so this is dried for a while and now we're going to pull it. And so I'm getting about the same result as I would have just by pulling it right away. But it's good to try. I do think I got a little bit more. The one thing that we are getting is because we are using tissue paper and the tissue paper is absorbing the paint a little bit differently, we're getting these little tiny wrinkles and that's okay. I actually like it. I prefer that. So the other things, and because we've left this a little bit as well too, a lot more of the paint has dried on these guys. So this is going to give us a slightly different effect. But let's add in some white paint. I'm just gonna use my newer thing of Cabio paint. Sometimes what happens is the lower you get into your tube of paint, sometimes it's hard to control how much you're moving out onto your plate. So that's something to keep in mind. It's sometimes a little harder to control. So I'm using a more full thing of paint this time. So I'm hopefully gonna have a lot more of an even distribution of paint, giving us a more even look. Another piece of cardstock. And we're going to leave this on for probably a good 5 minutes. Give it a really good rub. You want to make sure that it is touching along all the edges, that you're getting the best print you possibly can. Okay, so now we're going to pull our final print. I let this dry super long just to make sure it's really good. Okay, there we go. Now look at this. Look at that detail, and look how beautiful that is. So here's the previous one. You can see that with this one, because I pulled the tissue paper layer off right away, we ended up with more blue on the background, and we had a little bit more paint around here. By having that paint dry, we ended up with less around all those edges, and it created a really beautiful final effect. So very different feel on the same thing. So I hope this has given you lots of ideas on how to use leaves in your next gel print. And if you've enjoyed this video, make sure to check out the video on the right hand side next. That one is one about layers and how to use gel print layers and several ways of layering. So I'll see you in the next video.